It wasn't supposed to happen. I had no intention of letting it happen, not in a million years. I was perfectly content with the life I had built. I had a routine, stability, and most importantly, control. I had convinced myself that I didn't need anything or anyone else. But that all changed in one instant. One encounter that I'll never be able to forget, no matter how hard I try. I remember the day it happened like it was etched into my memory forever. It was just another ordinary day at work, one of those days where time seemed to stretch out, where the hours moved slowly and you could feel the weight of the world pressing down on you. I had been pushing through the mundane tasks that came with my job, barely keeping my head above water. I wasn't unhappy, but I wasn't truly happy either. It was a life of comfortable numbness, something I had learned to accept. I didn't expect anything extraordinary to happen. But then he walked into the coffee shop. It wasn't like I noticed him right away. In fact, I didn't even think twice when he first stepped in. I was too caught up in my own thoughts, too absorbed in the half-hearted conversation I was having with a colleague. The usual background noise of the coffee shop, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of mugs, the murmur of voices was drowned out by the buzz in my head. It was another typical morning. But something shifted when I saw him sit down across from me. He wasn't anyone remarkable at first glance. Tall, maybe a little over 6 feet, with dark hair and a relaxed demeanor that seemed almost out of place in the bustling cafe. He had a calmness about him, a quiet confidence that made people take notice without even trying. I didn't even realize I was staring until he looked up and our eyes met. It was one of those moments. The kind of moment that feels like time stops, and for just an instant, everything becomes sharp, vivid, as if the world is in focus for the first time. His gaze locked with mine, and I felt something shift in the air between us. It wasn't a jolt or a lightning strike, but rather a subtle pull, a quiet, undeniable connection. I looked away quickly, embarrassed by the momentary lapse in control, but my heart was racing. Why had I reacted like that? I had seen plenty of attractive people before, plenty of strangers, but this time felt different. There was something about him that made me feel unsettled, and I didn't know what to make of it. I tried to shake off the feeling. It was ridiculous. I had a boyfriend, a stable life. I didn't need to entertain random feelings for a stranger, especially not in a place like this. But still, my thoughts kept drifting back to him, to the way he had looked at me. The intensity of that fleeting moment. I tried to focus on my work, to brush it off as nothing more than a brief, unimportant encounter, but the feeling lingered. Later that day, I found myself returning to the coffee shop after a long afternoon of meetings. I walked in, expecting to grab a quick coffee and head home. I was lost in my thoughts, running through the mental checklist of things I had to do when I bumped into him again. This time, he was seated at the corner of the cafe, alone, with a book in his hand. I hesitated for a second. I wasn't one to engage with strangers. But for some reason, I felt compelled to approach him. I don't know what it was about him. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, the calm that radiated from him. Or maybe it was something deeper. Whatever it was, I couldn't ignore it. I walked up to him, heart pounding, unsure of what to say. "Mind if I sit here?" I asked, my voice trembling just a little. He looked up, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips, and nodded. "Of course, please." The tension in my chest eased as I sat down, and for a brief moment the world around us seemed to fade. We didn't speak at first. Instead, I sat there, watching him as he went back to reading. I couldn't help but feel drawn to him, but I didn't know why. I was always the type of person who kept to themselves. I didn't engage in conversations with strangers unless I had to. "Do you come here often?" I asked, breaking the silence. My voice felt foreign to me, like I wasn't used to speaking to anyone outside of my circle. He looked up again, that same relaxed smile on his face, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes, an understanding, maybe, or an empathy that I didn't expect. "I come here sometimes. It's quiet. Helps me think." I nodded, unsure of how to proceed. There was something about the way he spoke, the calmness in his tone, that made me feel like I had known him forever. It was so easy, almost too easy to talk to him. There was no awkwardness, no forced small talk. He was just there. We began to talk more, and before I knew it, an hour had passed. I learned about his life, his travels, his love for literature, and his interests. He seemed like someone who had seen the world, who had lived life in a way that made everything feel significant. But it was more than that. There was a depth to him that I couldn't quite put into words. He wasn't the kind of person who just skimmed the surface. He was the kind who dived in, who experienced every moment with everything he had. And as he spoke, I felt myself drawn further into his world. As the conversation continued, I realized something. I was forgetting to check the time. I was forgetting about the things that had seemed so important before. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about work or bills or the stress of everyday life. I wasn't thinking about the things that weighed me down. I was just listening to him, feeling the connection grow between us. When I finally got up to leave, I felt a strange reluctance. "I should go," I said, standing up. "It's getting late." He smiled again, that same easy smile, and I felt my heart skip a beat. "Of course, it was nice talking to you." "I'm sure I'll see you around," I said, not really meaning it, but somehow hoping that I would. As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt a tug in my chest, a longing I couldn't quite explain. I told myself it was just a passing encounter, nothing more. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. This wasn't just a chance meeting. It was something more. Over the next few weeks, I found myself returning to the coffee shop more often, each time hoping to see him again. Sometimes he was there, sometimes he wasn't. And every time, I felt that familiar mix of anticipation and disappointment. It was as if I couldn't escape the pull he had on me, even if I didn't understand it. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, I decided to go to the coffee shop one last time, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I would run into him. As I stepped inside, my eyes immediately found him sitting at his usual spot, his head bent over a book. This time, I didn't hesitate. I walked right over to him, a smile on my face. "Mind if I sit down?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. He looked up, that same smile on his face, and without saying a word, he slid over to make room for me. And just like that, the connection between us seemed to solidify. We didn't need to say anything at first. We just sat there, in the quiet comfort of each other's presence, and the world outside faded away. We didn't need to talk, but we did, eventually. The conversation flowed, and I felt like I was learning more and more about him, about his thoughts, his ideas, his hopes. He made me feel alive in a way that no one else had, and I realized I was falling for him. Falling for someone I barely knew, someone who was just a stranger in a coffee shop. But it didn't matter. The connection was undeniable. But then, reality set in. I was in a relationship. I had someone waiting for me at home. And this wasn't supposed to happen. But the pull was there, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't stop thinking about him. It didn't make sense. I had a life, a partner, a routine. I had everything I needed, everything I thought I wanted. But every time I walked into that coffee shop, every time I saw him sitting there, his eyes meeting mine, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Something that I hadn't even realized was gone until he walked into my life. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my world, my carefully constructed, predictable world, had shifted in a way that I couldn't control. I started to wonder if it was just a fantasy, something I had conjured in my mind because of a moment of loneliness, of longing. After all, I had told myself time and again that it was just a casual encounter. I had a partner waiting at home, someone who loved me. But what I couldn't escape was the feeling that something about him, something about our connection, had struck a chord deep within me. It wasn't about lust, not entirely. No, it was more profound than that. It was a sense of recognition, of finally finding someone who understood me in a way that I had never thought possible. He didn't just see the surface of who I was. He saw beneath that, beneath the walls I had built around myself. He saw the parts of me I had kept hidden, the parts I had forgotten about, the parts that had been buried for too long. That afternoon, when I sat with him in the coffee shop again, I couldn't help but feel that the connection between us had deepened. We no longer needed small talk. Our conversations flowed with ease, the words coming effortlessly, like we had known each other far longer than the few weeks we had spent meeting sporadically. We discussed everything, from childhood memories to our darkest fears, yet every word seemed to carry weight. I found myself hanging on to his every word, hanging on to him in a way that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. I should have stopped. I should have walked away and gone back to my life. But there was something magnetic about him, something that made it impossible to leave. And so, as we talked, time passed unnoticed. And before I knew it, the day had turned into night. We had spent hours together, and it was hard to believe that we had only just met. "You have a way of making everything seem so effortless," I said, glancing at him as he sipped his coffee. He looked at me, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I guess it's just the way I am. I don't like forcing things. Life is better when you just let it flow." His words resonated with me in a way I didn't expect. I had spent so much of my life trying to control everything, the choices I made, the relationships I kept, even my own emotions. But here he was, someone who was so comfortable with who he was, someone who didn't try to control or force anything, and I found myself yearning for that same kind of freedom. "I envy that," I admitted quietly. "The way you don't seem to care about anything, or anyone." The words felt heavier than I intended, and I could see a flicker of something in his eyes, something that told me he understood exactly what I meant. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "I care about plenty of things," he said after a pause. "But I don't think I'm meant to chase things that aren't meant for me. I don't see the point in trying to force something that doesn't come naturally." I took a deep breath, feeling a sharp pang of guilt. He was talking about the very thing I had been avoiding, the fact that I had been holding on to something that wasn't meant for me. But how could I let go? How could I walk away from the life I had built, from the person who depended on me, from the comfort of routine? My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced down at the screen, and my stomach sank when I saw the name. It was my partner. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I had always been loyal, always tried to do the right thing, but right now, it felt like I was standing at a crossroads, one path leading back to the safety of what I knew, and the other stretching out in an uncertain direction, pulling me towards something I couldn't yet define. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling slightly. I didn't want to answer, didn't want to hear their voice right now, but I couldn't ignore it. I had to acknowledge it. I had to face the reality that my life was about to change, one way or another. "Hey," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to sound casual. "Where are you?" My partner's voice came through the phone, tense and frustrated. "You're late. We were supposed to have dinner." I felt the guilt wash over me. I hadn't even thought about the time, lost in the moment with him, with the stranger who had become so much more than I had ever intended. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice small. "I lost track of time. I'll be home soon." There was a long pause before they replied, the hurt in their voice palpable. "You've been distant lately. I don't know what's going on, but this isn't like you." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the truth settle in my chest. They were right. I hadn't been myself. I had been avoiding the truth, avoiding the fact that something had shifted inside me, something I couldn't ignore any longer. But how could I explain this? How could I admit that I was sitting in a coffee shop with another man, someone who made me feel things I didn't know I was capable of feeling? "I'll be home soon," I said again, trying to sound convincing, even though I didn't believe it myself. I ended the call, staring at the screen for a moment before placing the phone back down. The silence between us felt suffocating. He was still sitting there, watching me closely, his expression unreadable. I knew what he was thinking. He knew what I was thinking. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. I didn't know how to answer. How could I? I didn't know what I wanted. The pull between us was undeniable, but I couldn't ignore the life I had built with someone else. I couldn't walk away from the commitments I had made, no matter how much my heart ached to do so. "I don't know," I whispered, feeling the weight of it all. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." He didn't press further. He didn't ask me to stay or to make a decision. Instead, he simply looked at me, and for a moment, I felt like we were two souls caught in a moment of understanding. There was no judgment in his eyes, no expectation, just the silent acknowledgement that we had both been drawn together for reasons we couldn't explain. "I should go?" I said finally, standing up and grabbing my coat. I felt the pull of reality return, the heaviness of the life I had left waiting for me. But as I turned to leave, I felt his hand on my arm, gentle but firm. "Take care of yourself," he said quietly, his voice low, as if he already knew the answer. I nodded, feeling my throat tighten. I didn't want to leave, didn't want to walk back into the life I had left behind. But I had to. I didn't have a choice. "I'll see you around," I said, my voice shaky as I turned and walked away. I walked out of the coffee shop and into the cold night air, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. I didn't know what I was doing or where this would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never forget this encounter, this moment, this feeling, the pull that had connected us, the way it had changed me. No matter what happened next, no matter where life took me, I would carry this encounter with me forever.